Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years passed and my brother and I discovered a new Avatar, an airbender named Aang. And although his airbending skills are great, he has a lot to learn before he's ready to save anyone.
Let's be honest. At this point, everybody knows Avatar the Last Airbender. We all know that it's widely considered a perfect show, with the only criticisms I've ever heard being about the finale. And even then, I feel like the fandom is pretty split on hating or loving it. This show is awesome in every conceivable way, with some of the most well-written characters and arcs that I have ever seen. But what I don't see getting talked about as often is the actual story, the plot. So that's where I want to start. The premise of the plot is very simple. The Fire Nation is evil and needs to be stopped. Aang, the Avatar, is the only one who can do this, and we have a timeline. He has to do it by the end of summer. With that established, we essentially watch the characters level up each season, knowing that everything they do will eventually lead to the final battle. The simplicity of this plot is what allows the show to spend so much time on its characters. The plot is straightforward so that the characters can be complex. We'll get to the characters later. For now, let's talk about the plot of season 1. I would say that this season was really about introducing us to the world and amplifying the effects of the war. Aang is a great main character for this purpose, because while he is familiar with the world, he isn't familiar with this world. He's never seen war or suffering. He comes from a time when there was harmony between all nations, and there was no fear or mistrust. So, as he experiences this new world, we get to see his confusion or his anger. Other characters have to explain things to him, or something that he thinks he knows turns out to no longer be true. This way, we learn about the world in a more authentic way, saving us from long, boring exposition. The first episodes are used to set up the story. 8 episodes to be exact. Episode 1 and 2 are character introductions. Episode 3, the Southern Air Temple, is to show that the world Aang comes from is gone, and establish that he's going to have to figure this out on his own. In episode 4, the Warriors of Kyoshi, Aang sees the consequences of his actions. He can't get distracted, he can't waste time, there's nothing like harmless fun. The way I like to think of it is that Aang is an airbender, which means he was raised being taught to detach himself from worldly concerns, right? So in this episode, he knows there's a war going on. I mean, he just saw how the Fire Nation completely destroyed his people. But because of his culture, Aang struggles to really internalize that. He can't really connect the war to himself beyond one day having to put an end to it. He's not a part of the war. But then he sees how Kyoshi Island, a community that was previously safe from the war, gets destroyed by Zuko, by the Fire Nation, because of him. He's forced to take responsibility. Though in the next episode, he's still focused on having fun because that's a big part of his character, and also, let's not forget he's 12, there's at least an awareness that they first need to be careful, and second, they can't stay long and waste time. Episode 6 gives us and Aang our first glance at the realities of the war, the oppression, the fear, and the hopelessness. This episode gives Aang a reason to fight. It's not just about Fire Nation is bad, it's about the people that need saving. Again, Aang is used to living separate from everything, observing. He's a pacifist. That's why I think they chose Katara as the main character for this episode. Aang is fine to leave Haru to be captured, because while he feels bad, it's not his fight. But Katara feels for people. She fights for people. And that's an important thing for Aang to learn. Episode 7 puts into perspective how much Aang needs to learn about being the Avatar while setting up spirits and the spirit world. And then in episode 8, we get the urgency. Aang already knew what he needed to do, but now there's a deadline and the added knowledge that failure isn't an option. I struggle to say that this season does a good job of sticking to the plot because very little time is actually spent learning waterbending or fighting the Fire Nation. It takes the entire season to get to the North Pole, and not a lot of time is spent there. The only time we see Aang get instruction is from Katara, and there's only one episode, the Waterbending Scroll, where the plot is about Aang actively learning waterbending. After that, he's just kind of able to do it. Even once they're in the Northern Water Tribe, they tell us how Katara is amazing. She's powerful and highly skilled. We see her be awesome in her fight with Paku, and then Aang is just kind of goofing off. I don't hate it at all. I'm just saying that if we were to be honest, this season doesn't have clear focus, especially when compared to the other seasons. And yet, this season only has 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 filler episodes. Since filler episodes are entries in a generally continuous story that are unrelated to the main plot, don't significantly alter the relationship between characters, and generally serve only to take up space, we can take this to mean that though season 1 isn't as focused on fighting the Fire Nation and winning the war, it has a lot of setup. Almost every episode is an important part of the story because it develops our characters or expands the world and the lore. It's far from aimless. The Great Divide gets a lot of heat, which I understand. The best explanation I can come up with is that it was run a lot on Nickelodeon. Since it doesn't rely on prior knowledge, it's a self-contained episode, so you can watch it without being confused. So maybe people don't like it simply because they watched it too many times. I don't know. I didn't watch Avatar on Nickelodeon, so I don't have that bias. I love this episode. It's fun with a nice lesson on putting aside differences and interesting commentary on history. Like, how do we really know what we've been told is true? History is told by the victor, and so on. So how literally should we take these kinds of legends? The fact that these two tribes are willing to believe Aang, who in a matter of 5 minutes completely changed their history, means there wasn't even really any anger or hatred or animosity between them, which happens. We're told something about a group of people, and since we don't interact with them, we believe it and base all our opinions about them on that information. Once that information is disproved and we get to know them, we find we don't actually hate them. If I'm to be fair though, this episode has very little character development. It's all in all a pretty empty episode, completely skippable, and so I get why people say it's the worst. But that's what it was made for. Nothing that happens in this episode has any impact on the characters, their relationships, or the story. But I don't have anything against this episode. Frankly, I would rather watch this one than the Northern Air Temple. Now, for these next 2 episodes, things are a little bit more up for debate. In Imprisoned, we see Katara and her stubborn determination to help people even when they don't want her help. So you may wonder, if it develops Katara's character, is it really a filler episode? I say yes. The episode doesn't advance the plot, doesn't affect the characters' relationships in any way, and has no impact on the larger story. Even what we see in Katara, in her inability to give up on people, it's something we saw in the pilot episode, with her rushing to help the boy in the iceberg with no regard for her own safety. We're not learning anything new about her, or Aang, or Sokka. And I personally think that Haru and his dad are one of the more boring and bland side characters that get introduced. I feel like this is just another one that you could skip and just not be confused. I love this episode because it's just so incredibly foolish. You have Sokka's irritation with the people's belief in fortune telling, Meng's crush on Aang, Aang's crush on Katara, and his attempt to follow Sokka's advice about being aloof. It's like a crack episode, and I love it. I think it's the funniest one in the season. But is it filler? I genuinely don't know. This one might be, again, up for debate because it's in this episode that Aang and Katara's romance, I mean, if you can call it that at this point, gets introduced. That's a pretty big development for the relationship, right? So this episode can't be useless, right? On the other hand, was finding out that Aang likes Katara really new information? I mean, it's no longer being hinted at, but it's only until like season 2 that it really becomes a consistent thing. So if you skip this episode, what have you really missed? A fun time, but what else? I don't know if you can say it's a significant enough impact to make this episode important. Aang and Katara's relationship doesn't change at all after this episode, almost like none of it happened. Katara has an eye-opening moment at the end when Sokka points out that Aang is a powerful bender, because remember she was predicted to marry a very powerful bender, but her interactions with Aang don't change at all. She doesn't see or treat him any differently in following episodes. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say that this show is so good that even the filler episodes add something of value. In which case, it really depends on how important you think certain things are. Like, could we say that Battle of the Water Tribe is a filler episode? Or do you think Sokka and Aang's characterization is significant enough to say it's not filler? I personally think so, especially for Sokka. But does it have an impact on the relationships moving forward or on the plot? No. Here comes the problem though. With only 3 or 2 or 4 filler episodes, depending on how you see it, the pacing of season 1 is incredibly slow. Like I said, it takes them till the end of the season to get to the North Pole, which doesn't give them time to explore the city or its culture, the people, or focus on Aang's waterbending. On first watch, this isn't a bad thing. But after watching season 2 and 3, thinking about going back to season 1 can feel like such a drag. That is, until you actually sit down to watch it and realize how great this show is. Still, as fun as it is to interact with new characters and get to see new parts of this world, for a season with 20 episodes, I would say they didn't pace themselves well. Maybe they should have added more episodes before the finale to spend more time at the Northern Water Tribe, but I feel like the ending feels a bit rushed. They get there and then boom, it's time to fight. There's a throwaway line about Katara progressing faster than any student Master Paku has ever seen, and all it does is tell you that they know they've rushed to this ending, but they just didn't have the time to flesh it out. I also don't think we've gotten very far plot-wise. From when we left the South Pole to the final episode, it kind of just feels like they hopped around for a bit, avoiding being captured by Zuko, and then arrived in time to power up and fight off Zhao's army. None of the episodes besides Avatar Roku, Winter Solstice Part 2, Jet, The Storm, maybe The Blue Spirit, and the finale feel like they advanced the plot in any significant way, which is proof that this show was focused on characters more than plot. If you look at the characters from the pilot and where they ended up in the finale, there is a massive difference. You can tell the journey they've been on and see the changes that they've gone through. But we'll talk about that later. That said, the finale is awesome. Definitely one of the top 10 episodes of the entire show. The bending is amazing. Getting to see Katara versus Zuko, how much Katara has advanced, the whole journey into the spirit world, God damn it, watching Anne speaking to him, I keep my face neutral the entire time, like you can steal my face through the screen. Everything feels so high stakes. When Zhao wants to kill the moon spirit and Iroh threatens him, you feel that tension. Aang becoming this giant water fish monster is so epic. It's like, what is he even doing? What is this? We don't know, but it is awesome. 10 out of 10 finale and an amazing setup for season 2. I mean, come on. There's no episode in season 1 that is as rich and compelling as this one. There's no episode that is as important as this one either. In it, we get so much insight into both Aang and Zuko. It's the episode that frames Zuko in a new light, where we stop seeing him as a villain. He becomes sympathetic. He's just a child with an abusive parent who is doing everything he can to gain his father's love. He's not a bad person. In fact, what gets him into trouble is defending soldiers from being slaughtered, which shows us that he has values other firebenders have not been shown to have. Aang confronts his past and faces his guilt, which is an important step in his growth to get him to the place where he can really embrace his title. It's important because knowing this story gives us some insight into Aang's character. The traits that define him, the traits that we see in the pilot, are incompatible with being the Avatar. He doesn't want responsibility. He doesn't want to have to fight. He doesn't want to take life too seriously. But that's what being the Avatar demands. So he struggles with it, much like he struggles with earthbending in the next season, because it's against his character. Him letting go of the guilt of his decision to run away and deciding to make the most of being here now is a big step for him. It's him finally taking up the mantle of Avatar and deciding to live up to it. He's not running away anymore. He's not trying to hold on to the normal childhood he wanted to have. He's accepting his role and his destiny. This episode is also where the duality of Aang and Zuko starts. They're both kids with expectations put on them by the world and their societies. Both couldn't live up to them, and both paid a horrible price. They both had their childhoods brutally ripped from them, losing everything and everyone they had loved. It's a brilliant episode. I've already said how I love this episode. This episode is packed with comedy, and I like to laugh, okay? That's all there is to it. I'm putting this here because when you're watching for the first time, seeing Aang, who up until this moment has been a clown, going beast mode like this is just jaw-dropping. This is just so dark for a kid's show. Every time I watch this show and see his skeleton, I cannot believe they showed it on Nickelodeon. A 12-year-old seeing the skeleton of the only father he has ever known. What in the world? The way he jumps off is just so badass, especially since we've seen him be completely spanked by the Unagi already. When Aang gets serious, man, he really becomes so cool. This is kind of like Aang going into the Avatar state for the first time. Bumi has been a complete fool all episode. So when he turns out to be this super ripped god tier character, I know we all had the same reaction. What? I just find this so savage. Like, he straight up killed this man. Death by drowning. This isn't a wow moment, but I'm putting it as an honorable mention because it's like, oh, snap. It's just cool. That's all. Seeing any bender doing powerful things is cool. Don't deny it. Again, this is a kid's show. Why in the world is it so dark? You hear Zuko cry out in the background, and Azula is there smirking like the demon child she is, and Iroh is narrating, I looked away. Like, Christ! Let's remember that he's not in the Avatar state here. Like, this is just pure Aang. Like I said, when he gets serious, he is so cool. And it's even more impressive when you consider the fact that Roku died fighting a volcano. No, it's not the same thing, but I'm just saying, if he could do this, he would have. You thought he was dead, don't lie. The first time you watched this, it really seemed like he was dead. Because, I mean, how could he survive, you know? Which is so shocking because how could they kill Zuko? How could they just kill him like that? Everything about this homie is terrifying. The design, the voice, the sound he makes when he moves like an actual freaking insect. The way he changes faces while he talks. Oh, when Aang is like, the koi fish, oh, my heart skips a beat. Like, I'm scared for him. It was like watching a horror movie as a 9-year-old. I really believe these people forgot who they were making this show for. You know those moments in TV shows or movies where you're like, nah, he's not gonna do it. That's where I was with this scene. I was like, as if he's gonna kill the moon. That's too crazy, even for him. I fully believed they would stop him, especially when Iroh was threatening him. So to say that my jaw was on the floor when he did it, and then when it was actually dead, not that he missed or it survived or something, it was dead, flabbergasted. Of course, this has to be here. I still have no idea what he is even doing. He's in the Avatar state, but is he possessed by the fish spirit? Is he even in the Avatar state? Or is he just in the spirit world, like when he was meditating? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's the most epic thing we've ever seen. The way I cheered the screen, I can't even tell you. I always forget how good season one is when it's been a while since I've watched it. Because, of course, season three is always there in your mind. So many cool things happen in season three. The characters are more developed and more powerful. So, that's what we remember. And, of course, the finale. But season one, yeah, I forget about it. And then I watch it again and I'm like, wow, like this show is just so good. What I think Avatar the Last Airbender does so well, and it's something that I was reminded of as I was watching this season, is making the world feel like immersing you in this world, you know? I said how they hopped around a lot, in a way that kind of feels aimless, until they get to the North Pole. But that hopping around was world building, so it wasn't useless at all. We'll talk about the characters, but even just thinking about the world building, it's crazy because you get you see the small villages, you see the cities, the big cities, it's like you meet different kinds of people in different situations, living different ways of life. They have culture, some of them are refugees. It's grounded in the world. It's about the world that Aang needs to save. It's about showing us the world that Aang needs to save, and the imbalance that the Fire Nation has caused, the destruction that the Fire Nation has caused, and making sure that we and Aang see that for ourselves, so that when we get to season 2 and 3, where now it's more focused on the actual goal, the actual, training to defeat the Fire Nation, actively trying to defeat the Fire Nation. When we get there, we know why. In the back of our minds, we understand why we're doing this. It's not just because we have to defeat the big bad, it's because we've seen this world and we know we need to save it. And it's amazing that they're able to do this. I really think it's amazing. So, next time we're going to get into the characters. And I'm so excited to talk about the characters. You guys don't even know. Because they're so awesome and there's so many, and there's so much about them that you can say. So that's going to be a fun episode. I'm excited to get to it. But I first wanted to do just the plot because I don't see a lot of people talking about it. And for good reason, because this isn't it's not a plot driven show. But it has its own merits. So I wanted to just get that out of the way first. And then we can get to the characters. So that's what the next episode is going to be on. I'm going to do my best to touch on as many characters as possible. And really just get into why we love them, why I love them. Yeah, so I'm excited. Thanks so much for watching this one, and I'll see you next time.